Hello, welcome to Shamanism, Metaphysics, and Grace. Today we have a little astrology update for you because there's quite a bit up in the air going on right now. Welcome, Jyoti.
Thank you, Lauren. Yes, there is. Just getting here is part of it all.
Absolutely.
What's happening in the heavens is that today is Wednesday and Friday, um, September 9th, Mercury is going to turn retrograde, and we've been in the shadow. The idea of what this Mercury retrograde cycle is going to bring us over the next 3 weeks. It's actually a 7 week cycle where it's 2 weeks in the shadow, getting an idea of something, and then it turns retrograde, takes us inside. As a culture, we're very outwardly oriented. And so when we are kind of invited inside, a lot of times things get misunderstood, get, placed where we can't find them and can't remember, and communication goes awry, all those kinds of things. And so for 3 weeks, we're issued an invitation to go inside, and depending on the sign that Mercury's in, um, that's the area of our lives we'll be looking at and dealing with. And then after 3 weeks, Mercury turns direct, and then we get to redo all the things that kind of got misunderstood or left behind. And then after that 2 week period of catch up, as I call it, Mercury moves on. So Mercury has a cycle 3 times a year, 7 weeks at a time. So when you think about it, it's almost half the year,
Sure,
you
sure.
know. And so this Mercury retrograde coming up is the day before the full moon, and it is in Libra, retrograding back into Virgo. And so it is having us look at our relationships, our sense of diplomacy, our sense of equality, and cooperation. And then it's going to take us back into our discernment. How do we discern what's appropriate for us? Not right or wrong or good or bad. That's not our business. It's taking us into looking at, is this an appropriate place for me, an appropriate job, or an appropriate line of work, or whatever it happens to be for you. It could bring in some health concerns because Virgo is always about health and healing and things like that. And so that's the arena we're going to be inwardly dancing in over the
Mhm.
next period of time, the next 3 weeks especially. So things are slowing down. So Mercury apparently is slowing down in the heavens to turn retrograde. It's not really, it's just our orb and Mercury's orb that makes it look like that. But symbolically, it takes us inward for 3 weeks. And so Mercury's slowing down right now. So it's kind of like pushing a rock uphill, you know?
Mhm. Jyoti, as you're saying that, I was matching that with what I've been feeling, and then also understanding it with that lens of we are outward facing. Everyone around us is outward facing, and to go inward, we have to slow down. We can't just make an about face. And when I jumped on the call with you, my first thing I said was, I can't move fast if I wanted to.
Yeah, yeah. And it's that feeling of making that turn in a sense. And maybe for some people also, it feels kind of like there's so much on the table. Where do I begin? So you bite size it. You just take a little bite. You take a little piece at a time and you work through it. Also, generally speaking, for a Mercury retrograde cycle, it's always good to have um, a project to work on. something to focus on. Maybe there's some drawings that you've been wanting to do, or maybe there's some things you've been wanting to write. It's always a good thing to have some type of focus so that um, you're not just looking at what else isn't getting done, what else you can't seem to find the focus or the time for. And so it just helps focus you. And it can be especially true if the project is somewhat meditative, like writing or like painting or something like that.
Yeah, I found that to be very useful. I want to revisit this particular retrograde and tease out a little bit what that might look like for folks, because I think I already had a taste of this weekend, revisiting relationships and saying, well, is this fair? Is this fair how we're doing things? And relationships can be relationships with people at work, right?
Yes.
Relationships with a partner, relationships with our children.
Yes.
And so what would that sifting out? What might be some examples folks might see?
Well, it's interesting that you said, what's fair, because Libra is always about what's fair or what's unfair or what feels unfair. Um, and Libra itself just wants a balance. It's very non-emotional and detached in a sense. It's the scales of justice, and it just wants equality, and it wants it lends a certain diplomacy. So it's Mercury, so it's asking us to look at our communication skills. How are we being fairly diplomatic, maybe not blaming self or other, but just trying to hold that balance that we're all in this together, and what can work. How do we find that balance of what works for you and what works for me, and coming together and um, working with that idea in mind? Not so much that I get what I want and, well, if you get it, fine, or vice versa, but really having the highest good or the most benefit for each of the people involved. And it can be in business.
Mhm.
Absolutely. It can be in personal relationships. Libra doesn't usually extend to friendships, but it's the one-to-one business, personal, neighbors, um, eh, people that you interact with kind of in the day-to-day also,
Mhm.
but also deeply personal ones, and finding solutions that just bring a balance to what feels like is imbalanced in the moment.
Hmm. It's interesting because I've heard this come up with my adult children that at their workplaces, there's a lot of redistribution of assignments and teams going on right now. And the far reach of this is fascinating. We always think astrology, how this impacts me, but in a time like this, it's impacting everyone, right?
It's global.
Exactly. And so globally, this can show look up like a redistribution of power and equity. Awesome.
Yes, and I think there's two world leaders that are meeting in the next couple days, if I'm not mistaken. And you would wonder at that type of communication and that level of communication and what will come out of that, and how these two people will conduct themselves and make room for, one would hope, a greater good.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's actually the focus. It might be to consolidate power, but we can only hope.
However, the fact that this is occurring in Libra, will that affect more of the chance that it will be about an equity or balance?
It lends to that possibility, However, you know, we're building toward a full moon, which is always advantageous because the energy is building. Mercury hasn't turned retrograde yet. It does on Friday. And so, if the talks are in the next couple days, and if we're in that upward surge of the full moon, then all things are possible,
Mm.
and communication is clear. There might be some loose ends that need to be tied up. There could be misunderstandings because the Mercury is slowing down. But always better to do things or initiate things between the new and the full moon, because after the full moon, the energy wanes. It just, it's not going anywhere. It quiets, building to the next, or releasing, you could say, I guess, to the next new moon. So we're in a phase of possibilities, as long as everybody puts their cards on the table.
Ooh, I like that. I like that. That's beautiful. So talk a little bit more about the full moon because it is interesting that we're hitting this and then along comes this full moon. How might that change it? It sounds like these next couple days are quite active and with possibility.
Yeah. So the full moon is, depending, I guess, where you live. The full moon is on Saturday. It's at 6 p.m. Washington D.C. time, Eastern Daylight Time, and it has the Sun in Virgo, opposing Moon and Neptune in Pisces, and so it's looking at self and other. Full moon can create polarity. If I'm feeling this way, obviously you must be feeling directly opposite me, sun opposite moon. Okay. So we need to be aware of places where we could create polarities that aren't necessarily true. And
Mm,
true is definitely there because of Neptune. Neptune is the spiritual planet. Neptune doesn't have a whole lot of interest in the physical plane. However, Neptune is always about um, kind of renting the veil to see what the truth of something is.
mm,
So sometimes I find that Neptune brings an illusion of something so that we can see through it eventually and know what the real truth is. And so, with the sun opposing the moon and Neptune, on a personal level, it asks one, well, who am I at this point in time? What do I want for myself? Where am I going? What's important to me right now that maybe wasn't so important before? And so it's kind of like a mild, because it's not an eclipse, it's just a normal full moon. It's asking a person to look personally at um, what they want for themselves. It's a kind of watered down version of a search for identity, because it's not an eclipse, it's not a natal pattern that you came in with. Some people do, but it's more of, who am I now, right at this moment in time, and what are my priorities, and what's really important to me, and where might I have been laboring under an illusion of something. And with Mercury retrograde, you've got the tools to go inside and look over that next couple weeks cycle of the full moon moving and waning down to the new moon, and Mercury inviting you inside to look deeper in yourself. So um, I remember, I don't remember where it came from, maybe a metaphysical thought or something, but you're never given more than you can deal with, supposedly. And so we always have the tools to deal with what's coming up for us. It's just whether we think we do, you know, and how willing we are to look deeper and employ what we've got to work with.
Nice, nice. So it sounds like paying attention to interactions this weekend will be quite important, and watching ourselves if we face off with someone about a particular issue. It may not be as dire as we believe.
It might not be anything like we believe
Ah, I love
because of the
that.
Neptune, the Neptune creates an illusion. So we also have to look at our projections. What are
Mm,
we projecting onto another person? What is somebody else projecting onto us? And then each person holding the other responsible for their own projection,
mm.
you know?
Right. And then giving ourselves time in the coming weeks to reflect. I mean, there'll be a lot of fodder created, I think, over the weekend for reflection in those coming weeks.
Down the road. Absolutely.
Nice, Jyoti. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you'd like to hear more about Jyoti's work with astrology, I'd love to direct you to her website. Jyoti, where can folks find that?
www.jyotywindastrology.com.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.